Riddle me this. What is the answer to that age-old and rather annoying philosophical question posed to car people since the dawn of the car? Would you rather drive a fast car slow or a slow car fast? Well, today, you and I are going to attempt to answer this question. As painful as this is going to be, we are going to leave this here in the hangar and go find something incredibly prudent to drive. And file this under the heading of Santa Maria Madre di Dios, the shit I do for you people. So I've been racking my brains on this topic, but I think this is the first time you and I are driving a Corolla together in over like 9 years. So to celebrate, you and I are gonna do a mixed-use road. A little bit of canyon. If you couldn't tell, there's definitely some canyon here in a Prius, but some traffic, because that's what people are really going to use this thing for. So with that, let's downshift, try to put our foot into this thing, see what 168 horsepower does going up a hill. So we're really handicapping this thing. Revs, there you go, bounced off the red line. It's a nice dam down there. Wow, so color me surprised. It kind of goes. I mean, it definitely ain't no 406 horsepower in an M550, but for the task at hand, the damn thing works. Now let's try one of these tricks here. There's a button down here marked IMT, and that means it does rev matching for you. Now, usually these things I'm not a big fan of, but let's try it. Okay, it rev match. It's neat. It doesn't quite have the sound of the last car we drove with, what, the 370Z, like 8 years ago. But okay, I'll take it. If you want to try sporting, let's try it again. Downshift, ready? It's cute. It's a nice little touch. But the most important thing here, there's some hills, rev matching or no, this is 3,000 pounds, just a shade over 3,000 pounds like we talked about in the tech review. And let's push it up this hill a bit, and I'm kind of surprised 168 horsepower can pull this thing pretty well. Who knew? I told you and you didn't believe me. I went on and on and on in not one but 4 episodes about carbon fiber reinforced polymer. Now I will admit, 2 of those episodes was a $50,000 electric car, and 2 of those episodes was a $150,000 plug-in hybrid that was admittedly very cool. But both of them were made entirely of carbon fiber reinforced polymer, and I told you that that would somehow, some way, cascade down to not so fancy cars. Well, here's the proof. A not so fancy car. Now, a couple asterisks here. Number one, it's not the entire car made of carbon fiber reinforced polymer. There's only this hatch piece here. And number two, there's no carbon fiber reinforcing the polymer. It's just polymer, or they call it resin. But the point still stands. This is some sort of polymer. And while we're here, Kumo didn't want to make the trip. Let's do the old pelican trick and see how this thing fits. Okay, now let's get out from the subdivisions of Escondido and try some driving dynamics. And let's try to remember this is a Corolla, but we talked about the tech review. There's some interesting pieces back there. So please don't try this at home as we pass a minivan and a Pilot and all sorts of boring cars like a Prius. And we got a nice turn coming up here. We're gonna downshift, deep downshift. Here we go. And let's hold on for dear life. You know what? Interesting. The back end is more buttoned up than the front end. Let's try this again. Downshift, come around this turn here, put our foot into it, hit off the red line. Downshift, push into it. Again, very interesting. There is a lean, but the lean is very much concentrated to the front, really buttoned up in the back, and that's a function of that multi-link unit that we first drove in the CHR, then we drove it in the Camry, and now in this. And I would argue it works best here. Granted, this is the lowest weight out of all the vehicles of the ones I've mentioned. But there's something going on. I think maybe it's just not tuned the right way in the front, but let's be serious. The kind of person that's going to drive this car is not going to drive it as aggressively as I'm driving this thing. And what that translates to in town, where people are really going to use this thing, is over bad pavement like that, broken pavement, railroad tracks. Basically, when things aren't perfect, this is going to have more composure or a better ride, which is usually not the case in a compact segment car, or at least it's starting to get better, as we've seen with like the Elantra with the multi-link suspension in the back. So this is a nice touch, and almost as if Toyota's kind of learning from their partnership with Mazda on high-speed stability and composure in a car that's not necessarily the fanciest one out there, but can still work in efficiency. So you and I need to clear up something right quick. This, a fancy car. The car you and I are driving, not so much. But it does have some fancy stuff in it. Like for example, I told you in the tech review, it has torque vectoring control. Granted, a poor man's version, but still torque vectoring control in a Corolla. It also has something called lane trace assist. Basically keeps you in the lane, blah, blah, blah. Oh, steerable headlights. Love me some steerable headlights. And then radar cruise control. So yeah, it works on an automatic, but it also works on the manual you and I are driving. So in an automatic, you can bring the car to a complete stop like at a light, and all you gotta do is just tap the gas and it brings the car back up to the predetermined speed, like traffic permitting. In a manual version, like the car you and I are in right now, that only works down to 15 miles an hour and the system shuts off. And then, file this under a pet peeve of mine, this car, 100 grand, Apple CarPlay is a $300 option. Now Toyota, they took their sweet ass time to get to the Apple CarPlay party, but it's fitted as standard. Oh, and they invited some very annoying girl by the name of Alexa. For the life of me, I do not understand why you guys like me sitting in the back seat here, but I'm trying this trick again. For the avoidance of doubt, that is where I would sit. So 6 foot tall person would have the seat there. There is some room here. It's not quite as much as other cars in this, I guess, you know what? I've never sat in the back seat of cars in this segment, but we have sat in the back seat a lot of those crossovers, which for some reason you people buy, and for the life of me, I do not understand why. Instead of getting a crossover, people, you should buy something like this, which is, it's somewhat, there's utility back there, but there's a manual transmission. It's more fun to drive than a crossover. Anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, get back to this practicality. So there is some knee room here, not a hell of a lot. There's an armrest back here. Let's say for the sake of discussion, I needed to put a drink back here, which I can, American Champagne Light. The hip point, let's go back to that hip point thing we talked about in that Lexus. It's kind of low. Actually, no, we talked about that in the Volvo. It's kind of low, which makes some room back here. So overall, it kind of works. Now, I did ask the guy who is he's the product manager for this guy, Adam. You know, he's a good guy. He actually is a car guy, prefers manuals, which is kind of the reason why this thing has a manual. Anyway, they don't offer a moonroof, although all of the technical information that I got shows the headroom with and without a moonroof. So my guess is it would impact here if there was a moonroof. But something tells me, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, that there's gonna be a moonroof on offer because they're already accounting for the extra room back here. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna take the car back from Julia and start driving again. And so we come to the elephant in the room. Is it better than the IM, the car it is supposed to replace? Let me have a think on this one for a minute. Absolutely, positively, unequivocally, orders of magnitude better, and here's why. The IM, and there is no nice way to put this, if you have ever driven it, it was a complete sled. It could not get out of its own way. Then there was a problem with the IM that had nothing to do with the IM. It was called the IA, and it was brought out at exactly the same time, but very unfortunate for the folks behind the IM. The IA was designed, engineered, and built by Mazda, and even more confusing, it was supposed to be the subcompact, crappier car to the IM, but in reality it turned out to be the much better car. And that was a function of Toyota going through a bit of an identity crisis, both as a car company, as a brand that they were trying to put this car in, and then the car itself. Now fast forward to today, and none of that applies, in that Toyota knows what it wants to be now, and they know what they want this car to be, to the point where two things really stood out. First and foremost is the driving dynamics. Specifically that rear suspension, it's so dialed in, it overpowers the front suspension. So like an open letter to the engineers of the Corolla, I would say you may want to retune the calibration of that front suspension to match the rear suspension. And then there's the interior. I just didn't expect it. Like Toyotas, they have never been known for bad tactile feel, and they're screwed together really well. But they're never that fancy. I didn't expect it to be what this thing was. Like, for example, if you were to take your grandmother, who is just not into cars, but probably drives a Corolla, and put her into this thing, she will never believe you that this thing is a Corolla. She will most likely think she's in a Cadillac. So with that, I'm going to turn this around to you guys and leave you guys with a very specific question, because now the parameters of the compact world have changed. There's a new Civic. There's a new Elantra GT, there is this, and then there is the perennial favorite, the Golf, in terms of driving dynamics in this segment. So I'm going to ask you to choose only between those. Now, if there's a compact I'm forgetting, sure, but you can't choose like a BMW M5. You have to pick something in this segment. And tell me what you currently drive, what region of the world you hail from, and why you would choose the one you have chosen. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And now to answer that riddle from the beginning, does one want to drive a slow car fast or a fast car slow? Now, you know, this is kind of a rhetorical question coming from a Lotus guy. It's always the slow car fast, but there's one exception to that rule, and that's when you have 600 horsepower sitting over there. So, until I see you next time, bis später.